Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second knowledge sharing session of the CoolUp program, funded by the International Climate Initiative of the German Ministry of Environment. My name is Mustafa Abunofal, and I work at Guidehouse, and I'm supporting the technical aspects of the CoolUp program. Today's presentation is going to be about natural refrigerants and their role to achieving sustainable cooling. In this presentation, we will start with a brief introduction on the different types of refrigerants, their main characteristics and impacts to the environment, but also the downsides of conventional refrigerants. We will then deep dive into natural refrigerants. What are the different types of natural refrigerants, their characteristics, and their widespread applications. We will also bridge the link between natural refrigerants and sustainable cooling and the role natural refrigerants plays in achieving sustainable cooling. At the end, we will wrap up with main selling points for natural refrigerants and their important role. Over the past 100 years, scientists were experimenting with toxic chemical substances and also flammable with little to no regulations or standards. And in the 1970s, the scientists came up with a solution that's a bit more stable, which were the chlorofluorocarbons, also known as the CFCs. However, these substances were later found out to be harmful for the environment and also causing the depletion of the ozone layer. Therefore, the scientists thought of a different solution in which they reduced the chlorine molecules and came up with the hydrochlorofluorocarbons. However, the same issue persisted and they were partially damaging the ozone layer. And therefore, this led to the emergence of the hydrofluorocarbons known as the HFCs in the 1970s, in the 1990s. And these substances, however, were found to have substantial global warming potential, and they were contributing to the climate change. And since the Kigali Amendment, different solutions have started emerging to tackle this issue, mainly starting with lower global warming potential hydrofluorocarbons and hydrofluoroolefins, which are somehow does not contribute to the depletion of the ozone layer, but also do not have global warming potential or very low global warming potential. And of course, the natural refrigerants. I came across a statement that pretty much summarizes the actual situation that we're in, and it states, yet we have witnessed another historical amendment of phasing down HFCs. And yet, from the Montreal Protocol via Copenhagen Agreement and back, history seems to be repeating itself with chemicals replacing other chemicals. So therefore, our focus should be on natural refrigerants, and we will get to that in a bit. The following table shows a sample of the most commonly used conventional refrigerants and their impacts on the environment and their global warming potential. We see that some of them already have been phased out, such as the CFCs, and HCFCs in theory have been phased out by 2020. And we can see that the HFCs are being undergoing a phase down at the moment. And we see the emergence of the new future blends, HFOs. Now, the downsides of conventional refrigerants go beyond just global warming potential and the depletion of the ozone layer. For example, the unsaturated hydrofluorocarbons are actually contributing to the acidification of water bodies and therefore harming marine life. But also, in general, hydrofluorocarbons, CFCs, HCFCs, they come with byproducts, poisonous decomposition products, which are usually referred to as the forever chemicals, and they basically persist in the environment. Lastly, they do have unknown environmental impacts. And this actually also applies for the future marketed solutions, the hydrofluoroolefins, and in specific, the R1234ZE. This substance actually breaks down partially in the atmosphere to R23, which has substantial impact on the global warming potential. So what are natural refrigerants? Natural refrigerants, or a natural refrigerant, is a term used to categorize non-synthetic substances that occur in nature's biochemical process, so basically naturally occurring phenomena, unlike those synthetic fluorinated refrigerants, which are man-made chemicals. Here, one might argue that some natural refrigerants do in fact need to undergo, let's say, industrial purification and manufacturing to be able to be used as refrigerants. While this statement is true, however, there is a clear distinction between substances whose safety and properties are studied and known in their entirety, in comparison to those of fluorinated gases, where they have a complex chemical nature and they have yet had a much shorter use period. Therefore, they do have underlying unknown environmental impacts. Natural refrigerants include the following: carbon dioxide, ammonia, hydrocarbons such as propane, ethane, and butane, air, and water. Diving deeper with the first refrigerant, natural refrigerant, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a colorless, non-toxic, non-flammable refrigerant. It has pretty much zero impact on the ozone layer, and it has a very low global warming potential with one, basically because it's the reference for the global warming potential. Now, carbon dioxide, in fact, does operate at a higher pressure than that of the conventional hydrofluorocarbon operated refrigeration technologies. And usually, high pressure is usually associated with risk, which is somewhat a misconception, as there's a lot of applications globally other than refrigeration, which is operating at relatively high pressure. For even a simple example, drink dispensers. So also having to the operation at a high pressure could actually be a positive for the carbon dioxide. This means a more compact system, smaller piping, basically less material requirements, and therefore could result in actual lower costs at a larger scale system. And usually there's a lot of regulations to govern the usage of such high pressure equipment, but also there's a lot of parts and special parts that pretty much take care of the high pressure and ensure safe operation. One more positive for the carbon dioxide system is that they have a perfect gliding temperature. This means for heat rejection purposes, and which makes it a perfect fit for heat pump systems. Carbon dioxide is one of the oldest refrigerants, and it has been there since the early 1900s. As you can see on the right-hand side, this is an advertisement of an older carbon dioxide system, and it was, even in the 1920s, was advertised as a safe refrigerant. Now, carbon dioxide is one of the widely, let's say, it covers a wide spectrum of applications in the residential, commercial, and industrial system. However, its main focus are commercial operations. For example, for domestic hot water production is already an established technology and being used in Japan, and for commercial systems, it's used in multiple supermarkets for refrigeration or even for bottle coolers, standalone units, mobile air conditioning units, and heat pump chillers for hot water, and also chilled water production on a larger scale for gyms, hotels, and for heating and cooling of large office buildings. Now, carbon dioxide has a lot of potential and can really be as efficient, if not more efficient than that of the conventional systems. So a slight modification of the system could result in high efficiencies. For example, if the carbon dioxide was really tailored to the certain application, it would have significantly high efficiency. Also, for example, the introduction of ejectors based, of course, depending on the nature of the system, is already showing increase of efficiency by a factor of 20%, and this is already proven in Germany. So the following figure shows that CO2 transcritical installation are actually gaining momentum globally, and till June last year, 2020, carbon dioxide transcritical have reached over 35,000 installations globally, with the focus being in Europe. Next refrigerant is ammonia. Ammonia is a colorless refrigerant at atmospheric pressure, which has also no global warming potential, zero ozone depletion potential, and also environmentally friendly. It also does not result in harmful byproducts for the environment, whether during its operation or disposal. However, one of the major points against ammonia was its high toxicity. Ammonia is a highly toxic substance. However, there has been a lot of solutions to work around this issue. For example, there's a lot of standards and regulations that ensure safe handling and operation of ammonia powered refrigeration systems. Also, the utilization of indirect systems, where ammonia is basically contained in a separate room and it's working in conjunction with another refrigerant, for example, and it's actually mostly the CO2. So also outdoor solutions where the units are placed outdoors is also a perfect solution to eliminate such risks. One of the positives of ammonia is that it has a quite strong odor, which actually makes it a natural safety mechanism to really know that there has been a leakage. And the strong odor is quite effective even for very low amounts of leakage. Another misconception that happens is that we hear in the news that there have been accidents involving ammonia. But really, such accidents are mainly in the agricultural sector when ammonia is handled as a fertilizer and not really in the refrigeration sector. Also, ammonia is one of the cheap and inexpensive substances. Another thing is it has a very short atmospheric lifetime, so it does not really persist in the atmosphere. Ammonia, also one of the oldest refrigerants, and it has been used since the 1940s, and it has been the most used refrigerant and preferred for industrial refrigeration for more than 130 years due to its highest efficiency. Now, ammonia also covers a wide spectrum of applications, whether in the residential, commercial, and industrial sectors. It can be used for air conditioning of residential complexes, and it's also being this is already established also in Japan, and it's being under studies and demonstration to be used in district cooling applications. Ammonia is also used for larger projects, not just industrial applications. And in terms of commercial projects, it's used for air conditioning of airports, exhibition halls, large office buildings, but also used for data centers cooling. Again, as ammonia is the most favorable industrial refrigerant, so it's used in quite a vast window of applications in the industry. The system improvements mainly the charge reduction, safety, and tightness, have enabled the ammonia to spread among different applications and also expand to the commercial and residential aspects. The next natural refrigerant is the hydrocarbons. So hydrocarbons are non-toxic, environmentally friendly, they do not contribute to the depletion of the ozone layer, and they have quite low global warming potential. One of the major points that are held against hydrocarbons is that their high flammability. However, the flammable properties of hydrocarbons are well known and well understood, and as a result, they are really safely managed. There's a lot of standards and regulations that ensure safe operation, and it even includes different regulation levels based on the charge level. So, for example, depending on the application, whether we have a charge of, let's say, less than 150 grams, there are really no regulations and safety measures that need to be taken. And having such regulations enabled us to go for, let's say, a charge of 5 kilograms in ventilated cabinets, and can be used really safely in domestic applications. Another proof that hydrocarbons are safe and can be operated is that there are more than 700 million residential-based appliances globally. Hydrocarbons also can be more efficient than that of hydrofluorocarbons and other conventional refrigerants in most applications. Hydrocarbons are also one of the oldest refrigerants since the 1900s, and it used to be marketed as the odorless safety refrigerant in the 1920s. So there's a lot of misconception around hydrocarbons, and this in part goes to the can be basically attributed to the global or the international, regional, and national standards, as they are quite outdated currently and do not really reflect the recent developments and improvements of the hydrocarbons technology. Hydrocarbons are also spread over a wide spectrum of applications in the residential, commercial, and industrial sectors, and it's pretty much the most commonly used natural refrigerant. For residential applications, it's used in AC split units, and we will come to an example later on. And for home appliances, fridges, freezers, it's also used in multiple commercial applications as standalone units, but also it's used for transport refrigeration and mobile or air conditioning. Hydrocarbons really have a major positive thing, which they can cover different applications from few kilowatts to several megawatts in scale. For example, hydrocarbons are used to provide air conditioning for a shopping mall in Germany with a capacity of 2.4 megawatts. The next refrigerant is air, and air is pretty much non-flammable, non-toxic, environmentally safe, does not contribute to global warming, and does not have any ozone depletion potential. It's cheap, readily available, does not result in any harmful byproducts, and safe to use. Also, air was one of the oldest refrigerants, and it has been used in the early 1900s, as you can see on the right figure, in the figure on the right. It was also used firstly for food processing, freezing, and storage systems. Air applications, however, are not as spread as the other natural refrigerants, and it covers mainly commercial purposes for food processing, but also vaccine storage and public transportation, for example, in planes and also trains. Air is mostly used as a refrigerant really for low temperature applications that can go up to minus 160 degrees, which pretty much cannot be covered by some conventional refrigerants, and it's really characterized with high efficiency at low temperatures. Last but not least, the water. Water is also non-flammable, non-toxic, odorless, colorless refrigerant, has no global warming potential, and also no ozone depletion potential. There are no special considerations that need to be taken into consideration when handling a water-based system, but it's also cheap and readily available and also safe for operation. As you might have guessed it, water is also one of the oldest refrigerants, and it has been used since the late 1800s, and it was first introduced by Leslie from Scotland. And basically, water ice was first produced by him using an air pump system. And it was used since then for steam jet refrigeration systems. Again, water is also not as spread as other natural refrigerants, as it's kind of categorized for high temperature applications, so mainly useful for high temperature heat pumps. And it's also used for some commercial projects, for example, for data centers cooling, high temperature heat pumps and chillers. For data centers cooling, there are some applications that already have demonstrated electricity savings up to 80% while really performing the same application as that of the conventional refrigerants. A quick breakdown of the natural refrigerants applications. So we can see that the natural refrigerants really cover pretty much all applications that are covered by conventional refrigerants, and each natural refrigerant is suitable for certain applications. So there is no one suitable refrigerant that fits all applications. So what is the role of natural refrigerants and how can they contribute to achieving sustainable cooling? Sustainable cooling can be achieved by basically by balancing two aspects. First of all, there shouldn't be any environmental degradation or toxicity, but also the zero equivalent CO2 emissions. The environmental degradation and toxicity part can be handled through the utilization of natural refrigerant, as we've witnessed earlier, or by not using any refrigerants. As for the CO2 emissions, there are two types of CO2 emissions resulting in whichever system of cooling. Those are direct emissions and indirect emissions. Direct emissions are those related to the emissions from the refrigerant itself, and indirect emissions are based on the demand. We can eliminate direct emissions from the refrigerants by using natural refrigerants. As for indirect emissions, it can be eliminated either by enhancing the overall system or by reducing the overall energy demand, which can be done either on a system level or a component level. So by having a very high efficient building or high efficiency air conditioning system. Also, the residuals can be eliminated by the introduction of renewable energy sources, whether it's on-site or off-site for district cooling. So, two main takeaways that need to be taken into consideration to achieve sustainable cooling. We need a multi-criteria decision making that takes into consideration the trade-offs between cost concerns, direct, indirect emissions, and the overall environmental risks. One point that needs to be taken into consideration is that single value focused arguments, for example, focusing on equipment performance classes, may potentially hinder the acceleration of technologies using alternative, which are the natural refrigerants. So here we have an example of how to achieve climate neutral sustainable cooling. On the left-hand side, we see a block of residential buildings that are operated by split units for their cooling system. And on the right-hand side, we see the total equivalent global warming potential in CO2 equivalent. Starting with the status quo, we see that there are two types of emissions, direct and indirect emissions. Direct emissions, as we mentioned, those resulting from the refrigerant, and indirect are based on the demand. Now, introducing energy improvement, energy efficiency measures would significantly reduce the overall equivalent emissions, as we can see in the step 2. And to pretty much eliminate the remaining indirect emissions, we can introduce renewable energy systems, such as PV with a storage system. So this pretty much eliminates indirect emissions, which leaves us with a percentage of direct emissions. Now, this step can be overcome by changing the operating system of the houses by using a propane-based split unit system that eliminates direct emissions from the refrigerants. So again, sustainable cooling, climate neutral, sustainable cooling is already available. Now, here are some examples on how to achieve sustainable cooling. Now, in terms of energy improvement, as we said, it can either be on buildings level or a system level. A building level by introducing solar shading solutions, control ventilation, load reduction, and different mechanisms. Whereas for the system, by introducing efficient components to have adequate control systems, efficient distribution systems. As for the renewable energy supply, it can be, say, either on-site with the introduction of solar PV or even solar thermal, and having a storage system, or even applying for load shifting purposes, basically. Or by off-site, which pretty much has off-site, which includes different renewable energy solutions such as wind or solar that can be used for district cooling purposes. Lastly, to get rid or to eliminate the F-gases, there's a lot of natural solution-based natural refrigerant solutions, such, for example, the compression chillers with natural refrigerants that utilizes propane, as the previous example, transcritical CO2 for supermarket refrigeration. As we've seen, the transcritical CO2 applications are picking up speed, and different applications that utilizes ammonia, usually for larger applications with central chillers. Another option would be the introduction of thermal absorption chillers, and even we can introduce passive cooling, which is pretty much there is no cooling system and there are no refrigerants in place. To sum up, key points that need to be taken into consideration. As we've seen, there is no one natural refrigerant for all solution, but natural refrigerants do cover all applications that are covered by conventional refrigerants, and even beyond that, in the case of air and also the water. Natural refrigerants do not generate any stocks of obsolete substances. So unlike those of the HFCs, which are pretty much, as we said, they are forever chemicals, they are a threat that could potentially hinder all the advancement that we have achieved to this point. Natural refrigerant technologies have really undergone major improvements over the past decades and are on par, if not more efficient than those of the conventional technologies. However, the regulations and standards need to be updated to take these into consideration. Natural refrigerant technologies also are highly efficient. Well, mainly on the refrigerant level, as we've seen. Ammonia is the most highest efficiency refrigerant, also followed by the hydrocarbons and CO2. So this would eventually result in lower indirect emissions. Lastly, integration of natural refrigerants is crucial to achieving sustainable cooling, emissions reduction, and saving the environment. As a last message to take away, the role here is to update the national and international standards regulation to actually take into account the latest improvements of the natural refrigerants and to refute the misconceptions underlying engulfing the natural refrigerants. With that, I would thank you for your attention, and yeah, I would like to invite you to visit us on the Coolab program website and also send us your questions at info@coolabprogram.org. Thank you.